Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by Linode, our cloud server of choice, and we're excited to share they've recently launched dedicated CPU instances. If you have build boxes, CI/CD, video encoding, machine learning, game servers, databases, data mining, or application servers that need to be full duty, 100% CPU all day, every day, then check out Linode's dedicated CPU instances. These instances are fully dedicated and shared with no one else, so there's no CPU steal or competing for these resources with other Linodes. Pricing is very competitive and starts out at $30 a month. Learn more and get started at linode.com/changelog. Again, linode.com/changelog. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is the Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, the leaders, and the innovators of software development. I'm Adam Stacoviak, editor-in-chief here at Changelog. Today, we're talking all things text mode with Lucas De Acosta. We logged his post, How I'm Still Not Using GUIs in 2019. It's a guide focused on making the terminal your IDE, and we talked through his terminal starter pack, which includes NeoVim, tmux, iTerm2, and ZSH by way of OhmyZSH, his rules for learning Vim, the awesomeness of CLIs, and the pros and cons of graphical and plain text editors. So Lucas, late in March, we logged your blog post, How I'm Still Not Using GUIs in 2019. And in that post, you said GUIs are bloatware, terminal rules. This is a guide to the terminal. What I find kind of interesting about you, not only about this blog post, of course, that kind of gives this full summary of how to use the terminal as an IDE, but the fact that you have the write command, the :W command, tattooed on the back of your ankle. That's super cool.
Yeah, I remember I've done that, and last time I've been in San Francisco is actually my first tattoo. After that, I've got 22, but like that one is the one I like the most. So it was like the first time I was traveling in San Francisco, so I think it was like the proper place. And at the time I've been using Vim for I think 3 years maybe. And I was just like really passionate. I just couldn't stop talking about it, and every day I was finding out new things. And it's kind of like Vim is really interesting because the more I learn, the more I feel like I don't know anything. It's one of those things. So yeah, it's quite interesting. It's like it's such an amazing piece of software. There's so many things. It's quite nice. Quite like it. Yeah.
The interesting thing about this tattoo is that it seems like, at least based on the picture, that it's on the back of your heel. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
So that means that as you're walking away, is it like a sign to the person behind you reading this, or is it just like by happenstance that you put it on the back of your heel?
Actually, I put it there because I think it was the less painful place, and it was also visible enough. But
is it the ankle or the heel? Like on the foot?
Ankle, my ankle.
The ankle. Okay.
Yeah, my ankle. Yeah, but actually, no one ever talked to me about the tattoo like before I ever said anything. I remember I was walking around on I think it was FluentConf. And I was expecting someone to say something about the tattoo, but actually I think no one noticed, which is quite disappointing, but it's fine, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So Lucas, there's a guy that lives here in Omaha. He has a big mustache, like one of those Monopoly Man mustache, with like the big, you could like twirl it, And I see him at the deli sometimes, and on the side of it, he's like a fix-it guy or a painter. I can't recall exactly what his business is. But on the side of his business truck or his minivan or whatever it is, it's got the mustache, and he's worked it into his name and his brand. And so I was talking to him about the mustache. I said, "There's no way he's had it his whole life now. He's like in his 50s. There's just no way he could, get rid of that mustache. He's stuck with it. He's worked it into it's who he is." And I'm just curious if you feel like, you can't quit Vim now, like you're stuck with it for life. Because you're the guy with :W on your ankle.
Yeah, I'm definitely stuck with that for life. I've thought about trying Emacs. I gotta say that, but it's just not who I am.
It's too late. It's too late for you.
Yeah, it's too late. It's too late. Yeah, it's too late.
Well, what began your love story with this with this text editor. So many people love Vim. We have a hashtag Vim Party channel in our Slack team, which was a play on JS Party. It was like we should have a Vim Party because so many of the people on the JS Party podcast are Vim users, and people tend to love or hate it. There's learning curves. Some people never get over that learning curve. There's jokes about, Vim, why can't I quit you? We've made plenty of those jokes over the years, on Twitter.
My favorite was the Singularity conversation. I think you said there's people out there trying to quit Vim as we speak. I believe it was on the show you said that. Yeah,
so I'm always joking about that. And I think everybody, it's a joke that's well used, maybe overused at this point, but I'm always one to beat a dead horse. That being said, why did you fall in love with Vim? This is obviously core to your idea of doing everything in the terminal, not using GUIs. Vim is a core piece of that, NeoVim specifically. So tell us how you fell in love with it and what you like about it so much that you're like, hey, I'm going to get this tattooed on my ankle.
Yeah, so it's been a few years now. I remember when I started, to be honest, I've seen a friend of mine using it and it looked so cool and he was super fast with it. So at the beginning it was more I was more impressed than, it was not as if I made an informed decision. I was just impressed by how things were happening. So I remember we were sitting next to each other on college, and he was using Vim, and I was like, hey, what are you doing? How do you do things so fast? And then he showed me his dot files, and he explained he explained how the whole Vim code works, And yeah, so then I just started, trying out all my free time because at the time I was doing an internship. And I, if I had used Vim, during work and stuff, I think I wouldn't have been productive enough. But after I think a month, I just persisted, I just kept trying. And in the beginning, I gotta say, it was very frustrating. But after a month, I was just so much faster and my workflow got so much more comfortable that I just couldn't quit. And now, now that I have, now that I started using CLI tools more often, I just all I know how to do, all my workflow revolves around CLI tools. I tried some IDEs and stuff. It's not the same thing, even with Vim mode. I don't know. It's just not the same thing. Yeah.
Where were you coming from in terms of a GUI or an IDE?
When I started out in college, we were using Eclipse. So I remember that was alright at the time, but one of the things I struggled the most, and I even talk about this in the post, is that especially for people that are starting out, I think it's hard to figure out what's the limit of the IDE. Where does the IDE stop and where does the language toolchain start, So I think it gets a bit confusing for people, especially people that are new. What are the things that are related to their development environment and what are the things related to the toolchain they're using, So that I think made things harder to understand. So once I moved to Vim and I just started using my terminal all the time, I feel like I know what my machine's doing. It's not as if I was handling that to an IDE. So I'm not just pressing buttons and, expecting things to happen and not really knowing what's going on in the background. It's I feel like I'm in full control, and if anything goes wrong, I know what the CLI is telling me. What the CLI tool is telling me, what the terminal is telling me, because you get used to the terminology, you get used to how things fail instead of just cryptic error messages or just pop-ups or errors being hidden or anything like that.
So it seems like when you think about, am I going to use the terminal, or really if I'm going to base my workflow around the keyboard or around a mouse, the arguments around the keyboard and a terminal versus GUIs, which usually require a mouse or another input device beyond just a keyboard. The factors are speed, somewhat context switching, but I think it's speed of moving your hand off or on the keyboard to the mouse, which is slower. Once you're there, then it's fast, but that transition back and forth slows you down. And then also the idea of customizability or malleability. I think a lot of the modern text editors are catching up in the malleability category. If you look at just the way you can trick out VS Code or Sublime Text to the hilt at this point, and so many things are built in, or not built in, but available to be added, removed, and customized. But if you had to think about what was the most important thing, you seem to be focusing a little bit on the speed because you say you feel like you're a little bit closer to the metal, so to speak. Maybe there's an analogy with, driving a car. Yeah. Enthusiasts like a manual transmission, regular people like an automatic transmission. Is the speed really key for you?
I don't think actually the speed is the key for me. I think, of course, it's more comfortable to use a keyboard all the time. But actually, most of the time, I don't think we're writing code, right? I think most of the time we're just like reading, we're thinking. And what I really feel that makes a huge difference for me is that I don't feel like there's anything on my way when I'm transposing thoughts to code, it's so much faster and it's so automatic now. Also, I can switch between like environments. Like often when I pair with coworkers, I can just open a terminal window, spin a Vim, and I'm fine without plugins, without anything. So I'm like good to go everywhere. I don't need to install anything. Also, like even if I need to, configurations are a lot more portable. I think there are many more advantages rather than just being fast. I mean, being fast is cool, right? I mean, when I'm doing a talk and I'm doing live coding, if I open Vim, I know that the subject of the questions are going to be about Vim, like at least 50% of them, right. And the other 50% about live coding. Yeah, it's just like it's fun, but I don't think it's the main reason why I use Vim. It's probably what got me started, but not what keeps me going.
It seems like the limitations of, as you've said in your post too, the limitations of a GUI being bloatware for one, or just containing features that you don't really need, you in particular, maybe even all users at large, for the most part, this is getting past that and sort of back to the analogy of having access to bare metal makes a lot of sense. But one thing you mentioned was how you persisted through learning Vim, which is, for me, that's been my hang up personally. Like, I still use VS Code. I'm a previous Sublime Text user. I know many of the Vim commands, and I'm an occasional coder, not an everyday coder. So I don't feel like I need to learn this today. And there's part of me that has regret. Like, man, I really wish I would have persisted like you did, on a side project, or found some sort of way through, because somehow, some way along the way, as you said, you'd fall in love with the Vim way of things versus a GUI way, and you couldn't go back. Can you talk about that persistence and maybe some of the things you did to persist? What were the things that made you get over these learning hurdles of Vim?
I think that the learning curve is indeed steep, but I think when you use a tool for a while, like you use an IDE or whatever your text editor is, I think the more you use it, like the faster you are on smaller tasks starts to matter more. So I think like the learning curve is indeed worth it. Because like if you use an IDE for a long time, like even though you learn some commands, like you're not forced to learn key bindings, to learn shortcuts or anything. You just like keep clicking around, and many other programs, they don't even like give you that great quantity of key bindings. So I think that like for what us engineers do, I think it's a lot easier to use CLIs, because since you repeat tasks a lot, it's a lot easier for you to memorize a few words and just be accurate when communicating to the machine than actually keep searching for buttons or anything like that. But my experience learning it was indeed very, very frustrating in the beginning, especially because I was using many plugins. I don't think I started it right. I think it's just like pleasurable, it's something I still enjoy, just sitting down and like configuring things, like going through plugins, seeing what other people are using, and like seeing if I can do something faster. Because I'm the kind of person that gets easily annoyed by tasks that I have to perform to like too often. I'd say I strive to be lazy. That's a phrase I've heard once, and I think it's what motivates me to keep going, keep using Vim, because if I have to do something more than once, or if something feels boring, I'll just try to automate it or try to find an easier way of doing it. And I think that's a great attitude to have when you're learning Vim. Just strive to be lazy and try to find easier ways of doing things. I think that's the key idea.
I'm over here. I'm in a little bit of a different situation because I might be the only person who's persevered, not the only, but a rare person who's persevered through learning Vim and still doesn't like it that much.
Careful.
I don't dislike it. Let me tell. So I feel like I've shared this before, but I'll share it again just for the conversation. So my introduction to Vim was by necessity. My teacher in college teaching me C++, he basically was a Vim diehard, and he said, you're going to SSH into this Unix machine, and you're going to use Vim, and that's what you're going to do. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that's what you're going to do to write your C++ programs. Therefore, I didn't really have a choice. I think if I had a choice, in fact, he let us use, it was either Pico or Nano. I think it was actually Pico for the first 2 programs. And then he's like, by the way, Pico is, he specifically said, a text editor in which you should write letters to your grandma, but not write computer programs. So he was very, very opinionated.
Wow.
And made us laugh quite a bit. But he's like, don't use Pico to write programs. I just let you do that. Now you're going to write Vim. And so I learned Vim basically by necessity over that semester. And I didn't really know this is back in the early 2000s. I didn't even know there was a different world of GUIs and IDEs or any of these things. I cut my teeth on Vim. And so I'm very proficient with the editor. That being said, on a daily basis, and I write software on a day-to-day basis, and I rarely choose Vim as my primary editor. I'll use it on servers. I will use it as a secondary editor, but I almost always prefer and choose a graphical interface. Specifically, I use Sublime Text, but I feel very similar about VS Code. I actually feel like they're faster in many cases for me, and I think it's problematic. I think we should be careful not to conflate the idea of a graphical interface with bloatware. Maybe because if we say there's GUIs and there's IDEs, yes, an IDE is a graphical interface, but not all graphical interface is an IDE, right? An IDE is an environment. It's like an all-in-one, similar to a framework versus a library, right? It's like a framework. And
true. I think
those are Visual Studio, maybe Eclipse. These are things I don't have much experience with, but Xcode I have some experience with. When you click the button to start it and you got to wait 30 seconds for it to launch because it's bloated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But Visual Studio Code, VS Code, Sublime Text, Atom, TextMate, Notepad++, I don't know what's on the Windows side. These are things that, to me, they feel lean and mean. They don't feel like bloatware. They feel like fast, small, lean programs that I can extend. And in my current life, by the time I get Vim configured to do all the things that I want out of a text editor, it's slower than, in my case, Sublime Text for many tasks.
I think it's what you said there too on the IDE front is pretty important too. Don't confuse VS Code or Sublime Text in particular, those two, because those are the ones I'm most familiar with, is like you are, with, say, Eclipse, which is meant to be an integrated thing into the language. And it's almost something you said too, Lucas, where you said that you're not really sure where the IDE ends and the language begins, that you sort of have this missing piece. But IDE, just to spell it out for the listeners that may not be aware, is it's an acronym, obviously, for Integrated Development Environment. So that just means that you're taking this environment, this GUI, and integrating it into a particular platform. It could be, a framework. It could be a language in particular. There's ones around Ruby. There's ones around Java. There's one runs around Go, and many of them. And they're for good reasons, because there's certain special or magic or sugar in a language or in a framework that you want to extend to a GUI to sort of, speed certain actions up that you repeat a lot, the same that you might do with a plugin or, an alias or something like that. So that's where this really comes in. I think your point, though, Jared, to not confuse the two is very important.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think even VS Code is a great application, Sublime as well. I really don't like IDEs, but I think there's still some disadvantages. Of course, everyone has their preferences. Like for me, what motivates, what motivates me to keep in Vim is that I think I would say that when you're using like command line interfaces, you can just like things already written for you, just like it's easy to communicate like between programs, because like as Douglas McIlroy has said, like if you write programs that work well together, and if you use the universal interface, which are just like text streams, I think it's just so easy to incorporate new things into your flow. Like things get so much more flexible, and I think you avoid writing software because if you like I feel like there's also like lots of duplication, because if you already have tools available for you to do one thing, if you can use streams and you can combine multiple programs, then I think many times you would avoid writing a plugin. Also, that's how I feel about Vim now. Like I don't try to make Vim an IDE as I tried in the beginning. I just try to go with the raw thing and try to use the terminal the way it is supposed to be used, I guess. But of course, like I think VS Code is great. I've seen lots of people using it already, and I think that's a very important distinction you made there. I just think that there are still some advantages to using the terminal.
And don't get me wrong, I'm a terminal junkie. I'm just speaking specifically of having your primary editor in the terminal. That's pretty much the only thing that I don't do in the terminal. Everything else is. And so I agree with all of the things that you're saying there. And I've found that Vim fits well in that workflow. So I'll use it as my $sign editor in my environment variables, so that when I'm going to do a git commit, it will open it in Vim. So I'm not completely on the other side of the fence here. I'm just a person who, when it comes time to like day-to-day like writing software, I do enjoy both the speed and there's an aesthetic value to a graphical interface that draws me over Vim.
This episode is brought to you by Clubhouse. One of the biggest problems software teams face is having clear expectations set in an environment where everyone can come together to focus on what matters most, and that's creating software and products their customers love. The problem is that software out there trying to solve this problem is either too simple and doesn't provide enough structure, or it's too complex and becomes very overwhelming. Clubhouse solves all these problems. It's the first project management platform for software teams that brings everyone together. It's designed from the ground up to be a developer-first product in its DNA, but also simple and intuitive enough that all teams can enjoy using it. With a fast, intuitive interface, a simple API, and a robust set of integrations, Clubhouse seamlessly integrates with the tools you use every day and gets out of your way. Learn more and get started at clubhouse.io/changelog. Our listeners get a bonus 2 free months after your trial ends. Once again, clubhouse.io/changelog.
So we've been talking about bloatware, and I'm trying to define some lines because I think there's some GUIs that are and some that aren't. Lucas, you start off your post saying GUIs are bloatware, and you said it before, so this is something you got your thoughts and reasons about. Expand on that for us, and why exactly this is a talking point for you.
Yeah, so I think as we were chatting, I think it's important to make this distinction between GUIs in general and IDEs. Of course, I don't like. I'm not a big fan of GUIs in general. I think they're just not optimal for what we do. I'm not saying that GUIs are bad, that are inherently bad or anything. I'm just saying that due to the nature of the tasks we do, which involves a lot of repetition, which might involve a lot of need to automate things, a lot of need to integrate programs, combine programs. I think when you use CLI tools, I think you're a lot more flexible when it comes to that. It's a lot easier to combine programs. Using streams, you can use many tools to automate what you're doing. It's a lot easier to create scripts. It's a lot easier to extend programs. You don't have to write a plugin. It's just many things are available right out of the box because people have written great Unix tools. Just everything's very readily available. And I think also since we use those tools a lot with a lot of frequency, I think it's a lot easier for you to develop to memorize commands and just type them out when you need and just type them out than it is to be searching around for buttons or trying to remember like a specific sequence of things you need to do whilst you could have automated all of that. So yeah, I think there are of course advantages to using GUIs, but I just think that due to the nature of the things we do, I think it's more productive to use CLI tools. Also, like all the information they provide you, it's a lot more. I think when it comes to how you communicate with the machine, it's also a lot more exact. It's a lot more precise. So I think it's kind of like as if you were talking with the machine in its own language. So it's easier for you to understand what it says, and it's easy for you to tell it in a precise way what you want it to do.
Uh-huh. Another point that you make in your post, which I appreciate and agree with, is that when you invest learning time, because that's really what you're doing when you're learning, is you're investing right in future you. Mm-hmm. And when you're investing in command line and terminal Unix based, right, POSIX compliant Unix philosophy tools, these are portable skills that can be moved to a new environment, a new language, the next thing that you're doing. It could be on a different machine altogether. You can SSH to any Linux box in the world, and it's going to have Vim. It's going to have, and probably have Pico on there too if you don't want Vim. It's going to have LS, right? It's going to have Tree, or will it have Tree? Maybe it'll have Tree. Point is, these things are portable. Whereas on the other side, if you're using an IDE or a graphical interface that is a larger, kind of a monolithic program, you're really investing in one thing, right? You're not in stocks and bonds. We call this. Your portfolio isn't diversified. And so you can't take those IDE skills, move them elsewhere and use them. And so I think that's a really big talking point and a reason to invest in the CLI.
You're also assuming too that the visual goes with you, like you'd mentioned in college, Jared, that and we do this every day, SSH into a machine and I'm on DigitalOcean Box or Linode or whatever. There's not actually a monitor there. There's not some sort of visual. The visual is the terminal. So when you invest in VS Code or a GUI in those cases, then you really can't take that with you from a visual standpoint either, let alone just an installation option. Like even if you could install VS Code on the machine, you can't see its interface via SSH, for example.
True. Now you can get fancy and mount a drive, like an SSH mount, and use your local VS Code against a remote machine or something like that. But point taken.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I don't add too many things to my Vim configuration. I try to use it as vanilla as possible. It's kind of like this disciplined pursuit for less, so that I can be comfortable in any environment. Sometimes like when I'm pairing with a coworker or anything, like many times I'll just fire up Vim and just use it like without its syntax or highlight or anything, because I just feel comfortable that way, and it's a lot easier for me to, write code anywhere on any device. It's really good, yeah.
Would you consider yourself a minimalist or somebody that strives for minimalism, considering you said this disciplined pursuit of less?
I think the more I do software, the more I strive for less, I think. I think I actually like I think less software sorry, I got a bit lost.
Yeah. So you agree with minimalism then, it's a long story short.
Yeah.
I like what you say too in this post too around your advice basically, to for beginners at least, is to resist this urge to just use all the plugins possible out there and to sort of like learn it incrementally and then layer on plugins that may be useful to you, as you sort of gain more and more proficiency. Was that when I asked you earlier in segment 1, what some of your tactics were to getting past the hurdle? It seems like maybe originally you tried all the plugins and then at some point you gained some wisdom and you said, well, maybe actually if you're learning Vim for the first time to get over this hurdle, don't try to use all the plugins possible to actually achieve this minimalism we're camping out on here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are some plugins that are quite useful when you're starting out, like Nerdtree or, like Control-P or FZF, which is what I use now, just being able to fuzzy find files and, seeing a file tree. I think people are so used to that in, every single text editor or, IDE they use that's such an ubiquitous feature. I think those are quite useful. But many things, I think they can just be done in vanilla, and I think it's just easier and more portable if you just do them vanilla.
Let's expand from the Vim conversation and talk about some of the other tools that you're using. So in this post, you have the Terminal Starter Pack, and it includes Vim or NeoVim in your case, Tmux, iTerm2, and ZSH, and Oh My ZSH. And when I read these four things together, I think it's a very nice starter pack. I would say that on the Zen minimalism side, if I could say the word, and on what's stock on computers that you're going to be using elsewhere, I would actually argue that I'm beating you in this category because iTerm2 isn't on machines by default. ZSH sure isn't on a lot of machines by default, whereas Bash would be. That being said, Tmux isn't, and I'm a rabid Tmux user. So just curious why this is your starter pack, and maybe give us the reason why you pick each of these tools and why you like them.
Yeah, so I think NeoVim was as a natural evolution for when you're using Vim. I think it's just like you end up getting annoyed by the synchronous task, and I think it's just like a natural move since configurations are compatible and everything. I think that also once you've used a couple terminal emulators like iTerm2 or Terminator or whatever you use, I think you just like it's a natural evolution to go to Tmux, I think. Also, it's very configurable, all the plugins and everything. Also, being able to attach and detach sessions. I think Tmux is, it just integrates really nice with everything else that's on the terminal. I think as you've said, like iTerm2 is not available everywhere. That's true. But to be honest, when I started using it, I wasn't really very proficient with terminals. So I just started using iTerm2. I quite liked it. I used to, replace lots of Tmux features, splitting panes and opening tabs. And then I think what got me was like how easy it was to configure all how easy it was to import color schemes and all that. And I think it's just like, it's just
inertia. So I'll challenge you a little bit on that one because I am a former iTerm2 user and currently terminal.app. I think I accidentally talked Adam into just using the stock terminal on the Mac. Sure did. Mostly because of how much previously I learned GNU Screen. So I switched to Tmux probably 5 years ago, but I was a Screen user, which gives a very similar feature set to Tmux, just a little bit less usable and modern, I should say. I found over time that iTerm2 wasn't actually providing any features that I needed because I do so much with Tmux. And so terminal app, you can change the font, you can change the theme, and I don't really use tabs. And so everything's in Tmux with sessions, and I like Tmuxinator. I think I recently wrote about that on changelog.com if you want to read that. So curious if iTerm2 has any like killer features that you're still using it, or you're just kind of using it because that's what you learn and that's what you like and you haven't had any reason to stop.
Yeah, to be honest, I think iTerm2 is like it's more because of inertia, I'd say. Yeah. I think that's just what I'm used to, and I find it like so easy to configure like the fonts, the color scheme, and all that. I'm just so used to it, and it's just I think from all the things in the stacks, the thing I interact with the most. I think I replaced like all the features I used to use by Tmux. So yeah, I think Tmux just makes my workflow so much more organized. If I'm writing code and something urgent happens and I need to jump in like to do support or anything, I'll just detach a session, create a new session, or just move to a new tab and just do it very fast. I don't have to think too much about it. So I think Tmux ended up replacing all those features for me, and I just use it more out of inertia, I'd say.
So would you say that iTerm2 is questionable then for you? The terminal would do most of it?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty questionable. I'd say it's more because, it's just.
From the minimalism perspective, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, it's a great application.
Yeah, well, maybe you just talked me out of it. I'll just uninstall it now, maybe. Yeah, no, just I don't know. Like, actually, yeah, that's a very good point. I use it more.
What brought this up for Jared and I was, and this is about 2 years ago when I say, Jared, you got a new MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
And what hacker can resist the question of, so what are you installing on this new machine?
Right.
And that's the age old, great conversation to have. So he was talking through certain things. Says, you know what, I'm actually going to just use terminal instead of, I'm trying to resist, he said, I believe, if I'm quoting you from before, I'm resisting installing iTerm 2 because
just to see if I can get by without it.
Right. Because terminal's already here. Why not just try to use this? And for these reasons, he's already using Tmux and whatnot. And so the next time I got a machine, I recalled that conversation, and I'm a fan of minimalism. I achieve and aspire to have less. Doesn't mean I always am a minimalistic person. That is my natural state of being, though. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to follow in Jared's footsteps and just resist iTerm 2 and use terminal, and haven't looked back since. That's years now. However,
and to be fair to iTerm 2, the built-in terminal app has gotten a lot better in recent years. There was a time where there was a huge disparity between what iTerm 2 provided and what the built-in app provided. It was way better in multiple ways. And most people use it because of the split panes. But like we said, if you have Tmux and you're familiar with that, it solves that problem for you. And so I think there used to be a bigger difference, and I think at this point, it's less so. But that being said, if I go through and look at all of iTerm 2's features, I can probably find reasons why I'd want to use this, right? I can probably find reasons to install it, but my new philosophy is, instead of asking why shouldn't I install something, like, ask why do I need to? And if I don't need to, don't do it. That's kind of a minimalism perspective, I believe. And how far can I get on just what's already available to me? Which, when it comes to the command line and Unix-based tools, you can live your life without installing very much. That being said, Lucas, I'm curious if you've ever heard of Tmuxinator or ever tried it. Since you're a Tmux fan, is that something you're familiar with, or?
No, I haven't heard of it actually. Tmuxinator.
Yeah, so
I haven't heard of it.
It's pretty cool. So if you have a lot of ongoing projects, which a person who does client work, as well as like coding stuff for changelog.com, I have a lot of little projects going, and it's common to have different Tmux sessions for each of those projects and hop and forth. You detach one, attach another one, and it's all set up and ready to go, right? Well, Tmuxinator, unfortunately, it's a Ruby gem, so it has a Ruby dependency upon it. I'd love it to be like written in Bash or something, but it's basically a way that you can create your own configurations for Tmux, name them, and then define like all the panes and what each command will get run in each pane, and you just store them in YAML files in your home directory. And then you can just say, Tmux changelog, and it'll just start that whole session for me and save it for me from scratch. And I can have one of those for each, particular thing I'm doing. It's really pretty cool. And anybody who uses Tmux, I would suggest at least checking it out, because it's a good idea.
And I think it kind of like fits really well with what I usually do, because like I have kind of these implicit rules for myself. Like usually, when I'm working on this certain project, like this first pane, we always do this thing, the second tab is always going to be for that thing. So it's usually like, oh, my first tab runs things and, just, keeps a window open for in case I need to, move files around or anything. And, the second one is always like Vim, and, running some tests or anything like that. And I can like have these rules for myself. So yeah, if that automates that, I think it fits really nice with like, what most people do actually.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So for changelog.com, for instance, like the first pane is the server running, and then the second one is a console session open to the, with the whole framework loaded and everything. The third one's the tests running, and then the fourth one is just a shell. And so I can name them. I don't have to set them up every single time, because you do find yourself doing the exact same thing. What would be cool is if you could just have Tmux sessions persist through reboots, which I feel like maybe there's some hacks out there that make that work, but it was never really reliable for me. So those detached sessions will persist and live forever until you reboot your machine. And so this is a nice way of just, configuring it once per project and not having to worry about it.
Well, most of the procrastination that could happen or would happen would because of all the necessary cadence or ceremony to begin, right? Like that's some of the reason why people put off a task is like all the necessary steps you have to do to actually begin the task, not just actually achieve the goal. So in this case, if you want to work on a quick bug or just anything really fastly, then if you had to do that ceremony every single time, you'd be less likely to
even get started.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or you just find yourself typing the same crap out all the time. Like as programmers, every time we type the same thing over and over and over again, like our brains start thinking, how can I not do this every single time?
Right.
And that's a lot of the stuff Lucas has done. What you're sharing here in your setup is really just you solving those problems. And it's one of those things, I think the mindset of a terminal / in-terminal editor user versus a IDE user is an IDE user generally is like, just do all the things for me, give me a button, and I just want to push it. I think that's a perfectly viable way of looking at it. But on the other side, it's kind of just the more hacker lifestyle of, no, I'm going to actually I'm going to create my own environment that's ideal and perfected, and I can smooth over all the little issues. One thing that I've done years ago, and I don't even realize it anymore, I think about it now because we're talking about this, is I just started realizing, like, in the command line, every time you change directories into a new folder, what's the first thing you do pretty much? Like, what's the next command?
LS, right? I mean,
LS. Yeah. Like, I'm in a new directory. It's similar to like when you're like a text-based adventure and you're like, I enter a room, and now you're like, okay, tell me what's in the room. I look around the room.
Role perception.
Yeah, CD and then LS pretty much every time. And even if you didn't want to LS, would it bother you if you did? So probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I just overwrote the CD command in my bash dot files to just LS after I CD every single time for me. And so now that's just the way it works. I change directory, it prints it out. And that's just the cool stuff that you can do. And maybe I'm the only person in the world that likes that. That's fine. I'm the only person in the world that has it then.
The cool thing is we've kind of gotten to this sort of blacksmith kind of mentality of, say, ages of old, whenever the blacksmith in the town was one of the most popular persons because they would be the tool maker. And this was just an age where it was common in a practice or a craft to form and create and manipulate your own tooling. And I think that's kind of maybe even potentially a divide of hacker type, where not so much that you have to fully adopt this, but that you can appreciate your ability to fine tune your tooling. Like when you mentioned the IDE, Jared, having the button, that's a perfectly viable option. However, the hacker way tends to be, what, I like the button, but I want it to do this, this, and this as well. So a GUI may not be the better fit because you're the kind of person, or the person is the kind of person using these tools to want to make and fine tune their own tooling to adapt and be the best practitioner.
Yeah, there's a lot of pleasure also, like when you do something yourself, exactly like how it works, what you need to do in case you need to do any fixes, exactly what's happening. And I think it's also like very pleasing, as you said, it's just.
There's absolutely a satisfaction to solving your own little problems and just being, it feels empowering to just say, what, I had this bothered me. It was the smallest little thing. And I came up with a reason, like I came up with the idea of why wouldn't I just change it? So when every time I CD it LS's, and from the point that I had that idea to the point that I had it finished, like I had to realize that if you override a built-in command when you're in your function, you have to call the built-in, like literally the word built-in CD. That was like the only part I had to figure out. But from the idea to initiate, or what's it called, finish, right? Start to finish is probably like 15 minutes, and it's been serving me like that for 10 years of my life.
So
that feels really good, right?
Those 15 minutes was well spent to invest in the future self.
Which I think was one of the main points, Lucas, you were driving home earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Something else you mentioned too, though, Jared, was bash and configuring it and hacking it. So the last piece on the terminal starter pack is ZSH, and maybe the extension of that is Robbie Russell's Oh My ZSH, which I'm a fan of personally. But you use a bash, or you're using bash, Jared. So we're like 2-1 here.
Oh, you got me cornered.
Well, Lucas, help us understand, why is ZSH something you reach for, since you're a minimalist and bash, as Jared said before, is on every machine?
Yeah, so I think I when I started out, I was using Bash, and then I think the thing that drew me to ZSH was the auto completion. I think that was like the killer thing for me, the killer feature. I think that what's brought me in. Also, all the glob patterns and all that. And I think just like managing configuration with Oh My Zosh is just like so easy. Also, Zed, it's just yeah, that was kind of like a. I think the killer feature was for me the auto completion, and just like you can just get auto completions for everything you use, and just yeah.
But here I'm about to say, you know what? If there was Oh My Bash, I might. Because what actually draws me to ZSH is less about ZSH and more just the fact that Oh My ZSH existed and it made it so easy, and I like the easy button. There actually is an Oh My Bash.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So for us laymen over here, tell everybody what Oh My ZSH is.
Well, I'll just read the description on the repo. A delightful community-driven with over 1,300 contributors framework for managing your ZSH configuration. So it's really about Oh My ZSH is awesome. Robbie made this configuration for it. That's what Oh My ZSH is now, to sort of make plugins and this extension to use Rails, Git, and have all this configuration a lot easier. And that's what Oh My ZSH is this extension, this layering on top of ZSH to make your terminal prettier and things like that, and just change and augment the visualization of your command prompt.
That episode was a long time ago, back in 2011. We'll put that one in the show notes. Go back and listen to the old Adam Stack,
That's right.
And Kenneth Reitz interviewing Robbie Russell. That's right. See how that audio sounded back then. So that's what Oh My ZSH is. So Adam, you got brought to ZSH because Oh My ZSH was so cool.
Right.
And Lucas, you got brought to it because auto-completion was better than Bash. I'm not sure if that's still the case. I mean, Bash has auto-completion. Maybe it's just not as good as ZSH is. But I'll probably just stick with Bash.
Yeah, I think indeed, Oh My Zosh makes it a lot easier to get started with it, and the community is just so huge. It's just like so easy to like find ways of solving your problems. Find help and documentation and everything you need. So yeah, I think Oh My Zosh did like really fostered a lot of made it a lot easier for people to start using ZSH.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Rollbar. Move fast and fix things like we do here at Changelog. Check them out at rollbar.com/changelog. Resolve your errors in minutes and deploy with confidence. Catch your errors in your software before your users do. And if you're not using Rollbar yet or you haven't tried it yet, they want to give you $100 to donate to open source via Open Collective. And all you got to do is go to rollbar.com/changelog, sign up, integrate Rollbar into your app, and once you do that, they'll give you $100 to donate to open source. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog.
So we talked about the 4 pillars, you might say, of your setup: NeoVim, Tmux, iTerm2, and ZSH by way of Oh My ZSH. Of course, the command line and the terminal is way more than that. And the more of the commands that you know and learn and ingrain into your workflow, the better you are at it. Now, one of the hard parts about the terminal, similar to like an Alexa device, is discoverability isn't the best, right? It's difficult to ask the computer, what are all the things that you can do? Because, well, there aren't buttons to click on, which tell you what they do. So one of the things you have here at the end is other useful programs and things to know in order to get good at the terminal and use it instead of the GUI. So why don't you go ahead and we can talk about a few of these. There's a lot of beloved favorites in there. Curl, of course, at the top of the list. Much beloved around here. Daniel Stenberg, kind of a hero of ours and a frequent guest on the show for Curl and all he's done there. But I'll tee it over to you, Lucas, to talk about some of these other commands that you found useful and you integrate into your terminal life.
Yeah, I think these are the ones that make it easier for you to do everything you would do in a GUI. I think those are the things that people do the most. So I think it was useful to put them down here so that people know, hey, these are the things I can use to replace whatever I'm doing right now, and maybe do it more efficiently and in a more flexible manner. So I think like JQ is really really cool, especially because if you're using curl, you're probably going to get JSON back, and you want to work with it in a nice way, in a simple way. Also, string matter, SED. I don't know how you guys call it, like SED, SED.
That's what I call it, SED. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I quite like SED also since I already use them quite frequently. I got very familiar with like regular expressions, and I very rarely need to Google like a regular expression because most of the things I do also are like simple regular expressions. AG is very useful, especially when navigating through code when trying to find something. I actually use it through FZF on Vim. So actually, my FZF plugin uses AG, and it's really easy to configure. I can just use configuration to ignore whatever's on my Git ignore, so I don't get all those annoying node modules when I'm searching for things. So it makes it really easy to navigate around, to find things. AWK, it's I always have to do exactly what I need to do.
Me too.
It's like it's not very verbal, so I think it makes it harder for you to remember things, like unless it's something very basic. Googling is required, but it's very useful. Rsync. I was seeing a talk these days, and a guy was saying that Rsync is made of magic, and I couldn't agree more. Rsync is indeed made of magic. Very useful for.
Why do you say that?
It's just like it's ridiculously fast, and it just works so well. It's ridiculously simply to use. It's just just having an incremental file transfer that it's so easy to use, it's just ridiculously magic. Also, grep is such a great tool. I was reading these days on how you can use a post about why grep is so fast, and it's just all these things they have so much magic into them. It's not just Rsync. I think Rsync and grep stand out, but I think both Rsync and grep are great tools. Also, Make. I think many people overlook Make. I think it's such a great tool for automating tasks, and even though there's this joke around of they're only having being one makefile and all their makefiles are copies, like a bit modified of this first makefile, I actually think Make is like a great tool. I think it plays really well even with npm scripts and all that. I think sometimes things like Google foreground or like quite annoying to configure maybe. So I'd say Make does many things really well, and it's really simple to use. Has been around for a very long time. So I quite like it as well.
Well, so Lucas, for more on Make, stay tuned to an upcoming episode because Gerhard Lazu, our DevOps buddy, who just recently redid Changelog.com infrastructure for 2019, is coming back on the show. If you guys recall, a while back we had him on, maybe it was 2018, maybe it was 2017. I don't recall. Our first time deploying Changelog.com as the open source CMS. And that was with Ansible and Docker. Well, we've got a brand new setup, and Ansible is completely gone. Docker's still there. You definitely want to find out what we're doing this time. But I'll tell you, Gerhard is like a Makefile guru because all of our Ansible scripts have been replaced by one Makefile, which is open source in our repo if you don't want to go read it. And this thing has all sorts of interesting features. I never reach for Make. Like I use it when other people have written Makefiles. I wouldn't reach for it myself, but it's awesome to see how much you can do with a Makefile. So just a quick plug for that. And I agree, there's definitely a lot of tasks you can automate beyond just building and compiling code.
What I love about this list is that it's, as you said, Jared, with Alexa, which I think is actually a great analogy, is discoverability, right? The way that you discover, these kinds of things is by somebody else going down the path and doing a retrospective and sharing their learnings, right? Because you can assume imposter syndrome or, you don't know as much as somebody else, but meanwhile, you're a few steps ahead of somebody else and you can always share back a little bit. And this list alone is going to be helpful for, a future or up and coming programmer that is like, I never really knew or how to use Make. And now, now they've got this list to kind of go off of and some experience.
Yeah, I think Make is definitely amazing. I even joke in one of my talks that, we use Make in lots of projects, and we even use Make in Chai. It's not because, we're vintage and we don't like, Gulp, Grunt, or NPM scripts or any of that. It's just because it works and It's been around for such a long time, and, it's just so well documented and so easy to find material about. It's just amazing. Yeah, quite like Make.
Not modern, Jared, vintage.
I like that. Vintage, minimalist. There's a lot of things we can call Make, but I don't think we can call it minimalist, right?
Yeah. Well, vintage is a word I like. I mean, coming from someone that lives in East London, I think that's the right word to use.
Love it. I also give my +1 to most of these. rsync, I would be embarrassed to tell you how many things I'm still, deploying or backing up with rsync on different machines around the world. Such a useful tool. So AG, you talked about AG. You didn't pause there very much. This is a search tool similar to ACK. So there's been this progression of search tools. grep, which is built in on all Linuxes, probably most Unixes, is an awesome tool. ACK is a replacement for grep. I remember Brett with a great website, betterthangrep.com. AG is called the Silver Searcher. It's just like ACK, only it's focused on speed. I think it's written in POSIX compliant C code. So is this AG, the AG, the Silver Searcher? Do you use this only inside of Vim by way of a plugin, or is this also you just use it from the command line tool when you're just searching a code directory, or do you use it in place of grep, or do you also use grep in different contexts?
I also use grep. I use AG mostly inside of FZF indeed, but I'll also use it when I'm navigating around. Sometimes, I'll use git grep if I'm not in Vim, because I want to ignore whatever's on, git ignore and just see what I'm dealing with in Git. But yeah.
So when would be a time that you'd reach for git grep versus AG from the command line? Is it when you're searching for something specific?
So
I just don't understand why one would be used over the other.
So you mean why would I use AG instead of git grep, or
vice versa from the command line? Like, why doesn't AG fulfill all your needs? Would be the question.
So if I were to use AG, I would tell it to ignore actually I don't have to actually ignore my git ignore. Because when I started using FZF, I had to manually tell it, hey AG, ignore my git ignore. So I actually thought that I would have to always tell it to ignore my git ignore, but actually not. So actually I knew something wrong. I just realized.
Okay. I wasn't trying to call you out. I'm actually trying to learn because I tend to use grep just because it's familiar to me. Now I also use ACK, but I usually only use ACK inside of the Vim search tools. I feel like at a certain point with ACK, I used to have to tell it what kind of a file I was looking for, like ACK --Perl, for instance, or -JS if I just wanted to search JavaScript files, whereas grep will by default search every file in the directory. But I'm just going from memory there. I was just curious if AG had specific places where it fall down. But maybe we should just all be using AG all the time.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't know that. That's good to know. Yeah.
Well, there's one common thread that binds all these tools together. We've talked about the Unix philosophy. We've talked about small tools, loosely coupled, and the idea of, sending your input and your output between these tools by piping. And really what's at the core of that is this concept of everything's a file, and really the idea of plain text or just passing text around. And the beauty of that, you have another post called In Praise of Plain Text, which hilariously starts off how graphical interfaces are bloatware. So we've sensed a theme here with you, Lucas. But go ahead and just riff on that, the concept of plain text, why it's so powerful and why it's so useful in this context.
So I think that, just having this interface readily available for you to, integrate and combine programs makes it so easy for you to achieve tests. And also I think it kind of encourages good design, Because, when you're writing a program that needs to work by itself, that cannot communicate, or that it's hard to communicate with other programs, like when you're using a GUI, it's often hard to pass data from that GUI into other programs, whilst when you're using text interfaces, it gets quite easy to do that. So since you don't have to worry about, putting all those features into a graphical interface, you focus, that's a very important thing in Unix philosophy, just doing one thing and doing it well. So I think programs get a lot smaller, and, when you have less software, you have less things to worry about, you have less things to maintain, less things to update. There's less places where bugs can hide. So I think it not only makes it easier for you to, to accomplish tasks, but also encourages good design in general. And I also think that another thing that's important here is that when you're using graphical interfaces, often the creators of graphical interfaces have to, be thinking about, hey, what are our users going to do? Like what should we provide them with? While if you're, writing a CLI tool, you should just be concerned about what I want this specific tool to do. Like what's the smallest thing? What's the real purpose of this tool? Because whatever else they want to do with the output of that, or whatever they want to provide as input, is none of your concern. So I think that's really useful when developing application, both from the point of view of the creators, because for them it's a lot easier, because they have to assume less things, and from the point of view of the user, where it becomes a lot easier to use them in whatever way they think it's more suitable, so they can accomplish a wider range of tasks, I guess.
I like the way you end that post. Text is timeless, precise, and elegant. We should use it more.
Yeah, I think that when you're communicating to a machine, it's kind of like when you know, like, the language of mathematics, it's just a lot more precise. Yeah, I think it's just so simple. So I quite like the idea of, not having, visual abstractions, or, all these visual concepts, or things that you have to have seen before to understand what they do. Like when you see a symbol, like that's a common idea between us humans. Like there's a common agreement between us that, this symbol does this thing. So if you don't know what a certain symbol does, or if it looks confusing in a certain way, it's too subjective. While text is just precise. You tell the computer precisely what you want it to do, and there's no subjective in that. There's no searching around for buttons, or, there's no looking for an icon, or not understanding, like not finding something. It's always there. It's just exact and precise, and, as I said, it's timeless.
Well, you aren't going to get any disagreements from me on that one. Huge fan of plain text. Huge fan of Markdown, which has similar precepts and really allows you to write, prose, not engineering necessarily, unless you're doing documentation, but just the idea of writing prose to be read in a plain text format, at least a format that is readable and legible and enjoyable in plain text, but then can be converted into HTML or any other format for other needs. I think is the simplicity is probably one of the reasons why Markdown took off and became kind of a de facto language for technical writing.
Are there any resources you can share that's something you track pretty often? Maybe a text mode only newsletter or something like that?
Yeah, so I tend to go to a lot of conferences, so I talk a lot to people about, what are they using, and especially like since, whenever I'm doing live coding, or, whenever I'm using my Mac, I'm in my terminal, like, I'm quite approachable for people that also, use, like CLI tools quite a lot. So, I think interacting with people is like a very valuable way of learning these things. Because, sometimes I think, as I've said, one of the main motivations for wanting to, use the terminal more is to get more efficient what you're doing. When you get annoyed, you go there and you fix, and you try to find more efficient ways of doing things. But sometimes you don't realize that you're missing a more efficient way of doing things because you think that what you're doing is already efficient enough, right? So I think that's when talking to people comes, and, makes it a lot easier for you to realize what are the things that you could be improving but you aren't because you think they're already good enough. So you miss improvements on those points. I also, on GitHub, I'm always looking for people's .files to see what they're using. I think that's quite useful. I think I learned a lot by reading other people's .files. So yeah, just seeing what's in there, like how they use things, how they use tools, asking myself why a certain piece of configuration is there. I think that's also very useful. And also, like, I find quite a lot of useful stuff on Hawking News, on Twitter. So I guess those are the ways I keep myself updated when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. I can say that I've learned some things, a thing or two reading your .files, Jared. Particularly because you do some interesting things with Bash history or just your RC file, just different things that have been in your settings I've learned, even though I don't use Bash all the time. This is back when I did. I always appreciate looking at somebody else's .files. And just because you'd mentioned that, Lucas, I was like, you know what? I wonder, since we're such an awesome repo kind of fan place, Jerry, where we pretty much anything that's awesome, awesome .files, awesome Vim, awesome whatever, we're going to try and log it. I found awesome .files, which actually
I guarantee there's an awesome .files out there.
Yeah, it's a curated list of .file resources, so you can jump into a lot of different stuff. I think that's a great point, Lucas, to find learning, which is what I was trying to get at. Was like, for those listening, where can they find some good resources to just learn themselves? A lot of it is paying it forward by writing a blog post about where you've been, like you have in both of these scenarios, to sort of give representation and give a path forward for somebody coming behind you. And I think reading somebody's .files is quite enlightening sometimes. It's like, wow, I didn't even imagine doing that, or that's really interesting. Like, I think you were doing something in particular with history, Jared, and I can't recall what, but that's the one thing that sticks out to me about your .files. Is I think you had your history like an extreme amount or something like that, like 30,000 or something.
As big as it would possibly go.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't I want to have all that
Of
stuff
course.
there?
That's my same idea, but I was like, I didn't know I was able to.
The alternative to that is have no history. That way no one can track your moves.
That's right.
That's right. The ninja. The ninja move erases their history as they go.
Yes.
But I'm the hoarder. I'm just like, well, I'm going to keep as many lines as I think it's just set to the max available.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have the resources now. I think the history command was probably written back in the day when people were dealing with size constraints on their disk, but no such problems.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me wonder so I agree with .files in terms of a way of learning tips and tricks from other people, but it's so much more useful if somebody actually just walked you through their .files or explains why they do what they do versus just trying to, conjure their intent or hope they have comments on what they're doing. So I'd be curious if you two, but also the listeners, if you'd like to tweet at us or something or comment on this episode on changelog.com, if you'd be interested in watching maybe not a live stream, but a video where somebody would actually walk you through their .files or explain some of the more interesting tidbits in a screencast, or even just two people sitting there, one person asking questions, one person answering. Because it seems like that's a more digestible format for me versus I'm not just going to go troll through other people's .files anymore. Maybe back when I was in my early 20s, I would do that. But if somebody served it up to me, like, here's a person who I respect, and here's why they're doing their .files the way they are, I think that might be interesting. Is that interesting to either of you two?
It's interesting to me. I think that's the better way probably to do it. A good first pass would be accessible .files. Second pass would be explainer, please.
Yeah. And I think also just like seeing things in action, so that you can realize how that actually fits into someone's workflow, not just like
exactly
seeing a tool there, and knowing what it does, but not knowing how someone uses it. So I think that's quite a useful thing to know.
Also, too, like what we did, this isn't exactly a one-to-one, but, we've got Lucas questioning iTerm too, just by looking through his choices, so
a
just
critical eye.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe Terminal actually is probably just fine. So,
it's kind of like code review or working in a pair. When like you're all by yourself and you do things, you just do certain things. And then when you're with somebody and you have to explain, teaching does this to you as well. And someone's like, why do you do it that way? And you're like, why do I do it that way? Why am I using iTerm 2? I'm not sure. It made sense at the time. Maybe I don't need it anymore. So yeah, that's always an enlightening experience for everybody.
Well, it's been a fun conversation, Lucas. Thank you so much for, sharing your thoughts in these 2 blog posts. I know that you gave a talk at Nebraska JS, which, Jared, that's where you learned about Lucas from before.
That's right.
And then this awesome blog post, how I'm still not using GUIs in 2019, which is a guide to using Terminal. So for those listening out there, if you haven't read this, we'll link it up in the show notes. Do a deep read into this. Shares as not files. A lot of the stuff we talked through, obviously. All the links will be in the show notes. But Lucas, thank you so much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I love the show. I'm really happy to be here, and it was really nice to talk to you guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Changelog. Hey, guess what? We have discussions on every single episode now. So head to changelog.com to discuss this episode. And if you want to help us grow this show, reach more listeners, and influence more developers, do us a favor and give us a rating or review in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. If you use Overcast, give us a star. If you tweet a link. If you make lists of your favorite podcasts, include us in it. And of course, thank you to our sponsors, Linode, Clubhouse, and Rollbar. Also, thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner, Rollbar, our monitoring service, and Linode, our cloud server of choice. This episode is hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and Jared Santo, and our music is done by Breakmaster Cylinder. If you want to hear more episodes like this, subscribe to our master feed at changelog.com/master, or go into your podcast app and search for Changelog Master. You'll find it. Thank you for tuning in this week. We'll see you again soon. All right, because you've stuck in here to the end of the show, got a surprise for you. Here's another preview of our upcoming show called Brain Science. This podcast is for the curious. We explore the inner workings of the human brain to understand behavior change, habit formation, mental health, and the complexities of the human condition. It's hosted by myself, Adam Stacoviak, and my good friend Muriel Reese, a doctor in clinical psychology. It's about brain science applied, not just how the brain works, but how we apply what we know about the brain to better our lives. Here we go.
That applied brain science really stood out to me because I don't want it to just be data. I want you to go, how can this fit? What can I take away? Now, how am I going to change? And that sort of is where you come in more, and even some of the questions I want to ask you, what are some of the most challenging things working in the tech world when it comes to relationships?
Probably the most important one is isolation. More and more of the world and companies are being, for good reasons, they're being okay with what they call distributed teams.
Yeah.
And that means that you and I, we work for the same company, but you work from your home office, I work from my home office. I might go into the office a couple times a week if I live local, but even if I live in San Francisco, I'm still probably a remote worker, even though I can hop in an Uber or hop on, the train or whatever and go into the office and be there in a half hour. But why waste the time?
And this is where I would revisit what I want to talk about with resonance. And that whenever we're learning, no matter what thing, it's really helpful when we get feedback that's both immediate and specific. And so when you're by yourself and you don't have any interaction with other people, how can you get any feedback? I mean, you're losing most of the nonverbal communication, and you also don't have all of the voice inflections or facial expression. Have you ever tried to, be sad, feel sad, and smile at the same time? Try it.
It's pretty hard.
Right, because facial expression is exactly what's involved when it comes to empathy, which is relationships. I was reading a research article recently, and it talked about, how couples who are together a really long time end up sort of looking like each other. You ever heard that? Yeah. And so what they've looked at is when we actually empathize with other people, facial expression is really key within that. And so when you empathize with the partner you're with over and over and over again, your face begins to make the same creases and facial expression as it relates to where somebody else is emotionally.
Wow.
Right?
Say it. So that's creepy.
Well, this is sort of the hotbed when it comes to neuroscience these days, is mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons are what are involved with empathy. And so mirroring, meaning I get another person's emotional world. And so one of the research studies looked at Botox. And what they found is that Botox, because it actually assists in paralyzing facial muscles.
Right.
But then you can't contort your face, so you don't get wrinkles. But actually, levels of empathy go down. Right.
Because your physical appearance can't reflect your inner appearance.
You got it. And so when you're working in these remote locations, it might facilitate better work or more focus, and it allows people to be distributed and to capitalize on the talents across the country, right?
Yeah. Wow. So that's like a treasure trove, in my opinion. Talking about in a scientific way, not just like, hey, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
About all the cons of that, because I think what we can do is still have remote work, but do it in more healthy ways. Because I've been self-employed remote worker since 2006. Now I'm a unique animal. I know that. My wife knows that.
Right.
And I'm fine with it. I'm a good human being, but I've got some flaws, and I'm willing to accept and share those to some degree. And I think the problem is we just lack maybe a more purposeful or intentional feedback loop.
Yeah.
Which I think is super important to being able to operate in this world in just good ways. I don't know, healthy ways is probably the best way to use in this show context, is healthy ways. That's a preview of Brain Science. If you love where we're going with this, send us an email to get on the list to be notified the very moment this show gets released. Email us at editors@changelog.com. In the subject line, put in all caps, Brain Science with a couple bangs if you're really excited. You can also subscribe to our master feed to get all of our shows in one single feed. Head to changelog.com/master or search in your podcast app for Changelog Master. You'll find it. Subscribe, get all of our shows, and even those that only hit the master feed. Again, changelog.com/master.